Paul Turner is Rachel Carson Professor of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology at Yale, Director of the Center for Phage Biology and Therapy, and a microbiology faculty member at the Yale School of Medicine. Paul has led 10 local and national seminars and is co-chair of the Yale New Haven Teachers Institute's University Advisory Council. In 2026, he will lead his 9th national seminar, this time on the topic of asking questions in biology, discovery versus knowledge. Paul.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Good to see you. Good to see old friends and friendly faces. And I didn't say old people. Happy to be back, leading a seminar that has its own maybe 10th anniversary. I can't remember. This was a topic that I covered before, but I hope you'll agree it's still relevant. So as Stephanie mentioned, it's called Asking Questions in Biology, Discovery versus Knowledge. So what is this all about? So it was really motivated by a handful of things that I discussed with especially high school and middle school teachers who related to me that the students are typically reluctant to ask questions in the classroom about science, and this could be for fear of revealing their own ignorance, looking less intelligent to their peers, less intelligent to their instructors. So I see nearly the same thing by the time they reach my classrooms at Yale, is that undergrads are not so willing to engage in asking questions. And I just find that in the outreach that I do when I go to elementary school classrooms, those in the room will agree this is completely the opposite, is that young kids are very creative when thinking about nature, science. They're very willing to ask questions. So to me, that's an obvious conclusion, that somewhere, somehow along the way, our inherent curiosity about the natural world and the way things are operating around us, that this is stifled, and it could be self-stifled in a way, right? So I want to examine this problem with the participants in the seminar. Generally, biologists and other scientists like me, we're very comfortable revealing our ignorance because we recognize we don't know everything and we don't profess to know everything. And otherwise, we wouldn't be in the professions that we are in. What do I mean by that? Is that the act of discovery in science, this involves formulating a question, a hypothesis. In my case, it's about the natural world, it's about biology. But in testing this, your prediction can be wrong. That's the whole idea of testing it. You're not expecting it to be necessarily right. And in fact, the usual outcome is that it is wrong, and you iteratively go back and you figure out a different question, a different hypothesis to get closer to the underlying truth. So the key is that it's the joy in the testing. It's not the joy in the getting it right. So is this process of testing whether ideas are right or wrong, what we tend to call that through time when we get enough confidence in it is that's knowledge. So you make discoveries along the way. Some of them hold up over the span of time and others don't. If it holds up, we call that knowledge, and that's really the difference. So how to examine this from many angles is the goal of the seminar. I want to examine with the participants what does it mean to ask a biological question in the first place. Specifically, how do you formulate a hypothesis that can be supported or rejected? We'll look at some famous scientists who everybody tends to recognize the name Einstein and Darwin and so on, but it doesn't mean that everything they did in their careers was correct. In fact, there were many things they got wrong, but they are held to a high stature. And then we'll also talk about some scientists who got things right or wrong, and that's not the point, but at the time when they were doing their work, their efforts were way undervalued. People like Rosalind Franklin, Barbara McClintock, and Ernest Everett Just. And for those last three names, does anybody in the room know all three of those names? That's what I thought. Okay, so these happen to be women and scientists of color who during their time, they made amazing discoveries, but they were basically ignored or expected that they were wrong because they weren't the ones who were allowed to participate on average. I work in biomedicine, so I'd like to examine this from the lens of biomedicine, where it's not immediately obvious who predicts things right or wrong, but ultimately how these results make it into the public and the public perception and how it shakes the trust in science. So we see a lot of this today. Examples include the emergence of H1N1 flu virus some years ago, and how The press talked correctly about that being a threat, and scientists at the time thought that would be a very big threat, but it ended up not being as deadly as predicted. And at least to me, this had set the stage for what came later as COVID-19 and all the skepticism and paranoia over whether the information that was being handed down was actually correct, the skepticism and paranoia about the origin of where that emergence came from, how to prevent the spread, whether masking would be the appropriate way to do it or not, and especially vaccination, mRNA vaccines, and whether the public could immediately trust this versus something that's so new that it would not be trustworthy. Other examples could be work on human subjects that violated the law and how it amazingly occurred even after there were widespread worldwide laws to prevent it, things like the Tuskegee syphilis study. So I watched Frankenstein last night, Guillermo del Toro's, and I think it was just on Netflix, so you may not have seen it yet. I'm not going to give anything away, but one of the characters is struggling with syphilis, and you come to find out this, and they describe the symptoms of it, and it is truly horrific. When syphilis advances to its later stage, it's bad stuff. So the point that this was done purposefully to people of color is something that has deservedly remained in the historical textbooks because it's very bad. Another quick example would be the domestication of cancer cells that came from Henrietta Lacks, who was essentially dying in a hospital in Baltimore, and how this changed how medicine was done. And I used those cells in my laboratory, and this was a very big deal when it came to light that her family never got a dime for this. And then this was a wrong that was righted later on. Essentially, I want to look at one more thing that I'll mention that is also in the news. How should biology be taught in the classroom? And can the facts or the knowledge that I said earlier be distorted, especially when it's perceived to challenge our beliefs, such as in religion? So I recently spoke at a conference that was honoring the 100th anniversary of the Scopes trial. I'm sure many of you know what that is, where a high school teacher was tried for violating Tennessee law on teaching evolution of humans in the classroom. So there's a lot of ways to look at evolution. And when you look at it in the lens of humans, that's when things get controversial. So this is eerily similar, as I'm attending this conference and listening to historians, to many of the things in the current day. And a little bit of what Rod mentioned is that the policies can impact what is taught in classrooms on many fronts, and we're seeing some of this again. So throughout this seminar, we're going to examine the philosophy of asking questions, but we're going to keep grounded in science. We will examine social and ethical issues that I mentioned, but this is all about public perception and how it is perceived, what is right and wrong, what is the difference between right and wrong. And it's going to be a lot of fun, despite all this sobering description that I provided. So I really look forward to people participating, and thanks for your attention.